Let's pick up where we left off in this greatest of stories, following Jesus through his final days in Jerusalem, learning alongside the disciples that his blood must be poured out for many, and that the good news of his resurrection must be proclaimed to the whole world. Join us as we journey with Jesus to the cross and beyond the Gospel of Mark.
Well, good morning. Happy Easter, everybody. Praise God for the risen Christ. And in all the festivities and family gatherings and special clothes and egg hunts and chocolate bunnies, I pray that you remain centered on the history-changing reality of the resurrection of Jesus. It reminds me of the mom who carefully explained Easter to her young son. And when she asked if he understood what Easter was about, he nodded enthusiastically and he said, yes, Easter is when Jesus comes out of his tomb, and if he sees his shadow, we have 6 more weeks of winter. And sometimes we all get confused about what matters most today. And I'm grateful that you've made church a priority and have joined us today. And I welcome you warmly on behalf of our Grace Church family. For 30 years, I've had the privilege of serving as a pastor here. And I'm so honored to serve with a group of Christians who, as imperfect as we are, we're pursuing God together and focusing on making this community and our region a better place. And I hope you feel the warm welcome of our church family today. Well, it's kind of a strange moment, especially if you're a guest, because today, in addition to celebrating Easter, we also have a bit of a sad milestone. Our church is in our final message in the Gospel of Mark after a 2-year journey studying together this New Testament book. And when I preached the first message in Mark's Gospel back on September 3rd, 2023, I said, some people read the Bible and feel like failures. We look at Moses or Paul and we think, I'm not like that. And even people who are really successful in their field, when it comes to spiritual stuff, they often admit, all these Bible heroes are great and Jesus is great, but I know myself and I'm not spiritual like them. And most days have given the choice between unselfish or selfish, like should I spend Saturday morning at a soup kitchen or should I scroll social media? I'm usually selfish. And so I remind you today, as I did at the very beginning, that Mark was acquainted with failure. He was fired from ministry by Paul. It's probably why failure was such a huge theme in his gospel, because the Christian life isn't for spiritual superstars. It's for ordinary people who try and fail and try again. And God uses very ordinary, unexpected people for his purposes, and he does extraordinary things through them. And so as we have come down the home stretch in Mark over the past few weeks, we've been bombarded with this failure theme. And the ending of the book is no different. Mark ends in a very unique and somewhat confusing way. Some of your Bibles may have more text beyond verse 8, but it was almost certainly added later by a scribe. Mark's original words end in verse 8 with total and utter failure. And it's completely fitting that we finish our study of Mark on Easter Sunday, because Mark's ending forces us to confront the central question of Easter. What will we do with the empty tomb? But the ending, it takes a second to process. In fact, does anybody remember the cult classic TV series from the early 2000s called Lost? Mysteries were everywhere. What was the meaning of the numbers on the hatch code and the smoke monster and the man in black and the island's electromagnetic powers? And for 6 years, viewer analyzed every clue. They built elaborate theories. They wanted, they were waiting for this one brilliant resolution that would explain everything in the series finale. And so let's just say the finale, it left all the loose ends really loose. And enter the Gospel of Mark, where after 16 chapters of miracles and teachings and conflicts, disciples sent out but failing, never quite getting it. Then there was the prediction of the cross and the promise of the resurrection. And then Mark 16:8, the story just stops. The women find the empty tomb. They hear the angel's message. They flee in trembling and astonishment. And Mark's final words are, they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. The end. What? We spent 2 years studying this gospel for that? Where's the risen Jesus? Where's doubting Thomas? Where's the Great Commission? Mark, come on, bro. You can't just leave us hanging there like this. But unlike the writers of Lost, I think Mark knew exactly what he was doing all along with this seemingly unsatisfying ending, because the story of Jesus isn't written for passive TV audiences where we nonchalantly watch the finale from our couch and then argue about it online. The cliffhanger at the end of Mark's gospel isn't poor storytelling, it's an invitation. And so today, I want to explore how Mark's unsatisfying ending actually reveals the most satisfying truth of Easter, that any failure in your story or my story isn't the end of the story. And so we're going to look at three kinds of failure that we all experience and how the resurrection addresses each one. If you have a Bible with you or a Bible app on your device, you can read along with us in Mark chapter 16. If you don't, no problem. The words are going to be on the screen as we go. And so I want to start in Mark 16, starting in verse 1. It says, "When the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. And they were saying to one another, 'Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb?'" And so let's get oriented for a moment. It's Sunday morning in Jerusalem. The Sabbath was the day before Saturday. And this particular sunrise on that first Easter morning would not only dispel the darkness of the night before or the darkness that covered the whole land on Friday afternoon at the crucifixion. This sunrise marks the dawning of a whole new beginning for humanity, a clean slate for mankind. Mark provides these very specific details because he's documenting a historical account. This is not a myth. He names specific women because they were eyewitnesses who were still alive to verify his account. It's like he's saying, if you question the truth of my story, go talk to these three women. They're still alive. They can corroborate everything I've said. But even more stunning in that day is the fact that Mary Magdalene and Salome were the first eyewitnesses of the resurrection. It's the fact that they were women. And this fact lends itself to actually the credibility of the resurrection. Remember, this is a culture where the testimony of women isn't even admissible in a court of law. In fact, Celsus, a Greek philosopher and historian in the 2nd century, he said, Christianity can't be true because the written accounts of the resurrection are based on the testimony of women. And he said, we all know that women are hysterical. And just to be clear, this is a quote from an ancient philosopher named Celsus. If that quote ends up online somewhere with a picture of my face next to it, I am not going to be happy at all. And so why does this actually make the resurrection account more authentic, even though Celsus says otherwise? Because if Mark was trying to make up a story about something that actually didn't happen, and he wanted to make it as convincing as possible so that he could start a global movement, he never would have written it this way. If you were faking a story that you wanted to be seen as authentic in the ancient world, writing it this way would be a terrible strategy, which makes us conclude it wasn't fake. It actually happened this way. It's an eyewitness account. And I love that as they're walking along to the tomb on this history-changing morning, we get a little glimpse into their walk and talk conversation. These women are wondering who's going to roll the stone away for them so that they can go in and anoint the body. These stones were sometimes thousands of pounds, very, very heavy. I wonder if they were wondering, where are all the big fishermen? Where did those guys disappear to? Jesus' closest friends and followers, that they were MIA, the ones who were supposed to be, bravely carrying on Jesus' mission. I can hear Salome, being like, hey, have either of you guys seen Peter? No, he's hiding. James, hiding. Matthew, hiding. John, hiding. Thomas, hiding. And Mark is reminding us that all the usual suspects who could have helped to solve the stone removal problem are nowhere to be found. But don't worry. The women's problem was solved in a way that they never imagined. Look at verse 4. It says, and looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled back, and it was very large. So let me stop here. This was a round stone that would have been carved out of the face of the rock. It would have been rolled down this little incline and then into a groove at the base of the opening of the tomb. Some of these stones weighed up to 2 tons. They were very heavy, and they were that heavy so as to keep grave robbers and wild animals out of these tombs. Matthew's gospel includes this added detail of protection, that Jesus' tomb was protected by a unit of soldiers, 10 to 12 trained Roman soldiers. And not only were these highly disciplined soldiers, but failure to do their job, i.e. guard the tomb, meant death for them. And so they were highly motivated to do their job. And these details mitigate some of the alternative theories that have emerged about the empty tomb. Some skeptics have said the body must have been stolen. By the way, this was also the disciples' first theory. In John's gospel, when the disciples are told about the resurrection, Mary tells them this way, says, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." And so for a brief moment, even the disciples thought someone had stolen the body of Jesus. And there are two outside groups who would have been motivated to steal the body, the Jewish religious leaders and the Roman officials. Maybe they thought they could avoid some riots or some public unrest. No more hero status for Jesus, and so they stole the body. But here's where this theory fails. Both of these groups had the same problem after the resurrection. See, Christianity spread through the ancient world like wildfire. And it was not advantageous to either of these groups to have Christianity growing in popularity. They both desperately wanted to end the spread of this new upstart faith. And both of them could have put a stop to this nonsense completely by just producing the body. Then anyone could see that this Christianity thing was a hoax and just go back to their normal lives. But no body was ever produced. Others claim that maybe the disciples stole the body. And this was the argument of the religious leaders back in Matthew 28, where we see them kind of paying off a group of soldiers to spread this narrative. It says, when they had assembled with the elders and taken counsel, they gave a sufficient sum of money to the soldiers and said, "Tell people his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if this comes to the governor's ears, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." And so they took the money and they did as they were directed. And this story has been spread among the Jews to this day. So this theory has a couple of problems to contend with. First is the change in the disciples' demeanor. So prior to the resurrection, the disciples, as we saw here, were frightened little wimps. Each one of them they were denying Jesus. They were fleeing every scene. They didn't want to be killed by crucifixion. They didn't want this to happen to them, and they were terrified. Well, after the resurrection, they are totally changed. They are filled with boldness. They are preaching and teaching and witnessing in the public square. And we have to ask, well, what happened? I think if Jesus had stayed dead, they surely would have still been in hiding. But even more damning to this theory that the disciples stole the body is that all of these disciples, except John, were tortured and killed because of their witness of the resurrection for Christ. If the disciples had stolen the body, that means that they would have known that the resurrection wasn't true. And just historically, people don't get brutally tortured and killed for something that they know deep down to be made up. Let alone 11 people murdered for the same lie, not one of them cracked. They were tortured, they were pressured to recant, they were pressured to take back their claims, and on their way to martyrdom, not one of them recanted. And the rise of the church happened right after that, which also still baffles historians. Overnight, a group of poor peasants started to claim something completely outlandish, completely otherworldly, something that they were willing to die for. And Christianity grew from 12 to 120 to 3,120 to 33 million people in the first 350 years of the church. Even the most skeptical critic of Christianity has to insert some mysterious X factor to account for the exponential growth of this movement that should have never gotten off the ground. And I'm here to proclaim to you today that the X factor was the resurrection of Jesus Christ of Nazareth from the grave, that this really happened in history. And so back to Mark. As the women were talking on their way to the tomb about who might help them roll away the stone, this huge, huge stone, as they rounded the corner, they were astonished to see that the stone had already been moved. Look at verse 5. It says, "And entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe, and they were alarmed. And he said to them, 'Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him.'" Now, can you imagine what they felt? They came to anoint a corpse with spices, and they found an angel sitting where the body should be, saying, "The corpse you're looking for took a big deep breath. He stood up and he walked on out of here, and he is risen." I like that he says, "Don't be alarmed." Can you imagine? Can you imagine one of your relatives passed away and you went to the viewing and the funeral director came out and said, "Don't be alarmed, but like your uncle walked out of here overnight." Alarmed would be, way down on the list of emotions. He has risen. The whole of the Christian faith rises and falls on this one claim. The Apostle Paul would later say that if the resurrection didn't happen, Christians are the most pitiful people on earth. Why? Because they are the fools who have staked their lives on a lie. Many of you know I was raised in an incredible home, had the ways of Jesus instilled in me as a child, but when I was 19 and 20, my college rebellion didn't include sex and drugs and booze. It included walking away from my faith and becoming an atheist, both functionally and intellectually. But I was still on this quest to find truth, and so I would drive to Chicago just about every weekend to explore new ideas and new philosophies and new religions. I had thought growing up that maybe the point was that Jesus just had better ideas, or he was a better teacher than Muhammad or Buddha or Hare Krishna or a Hindu Brahman or Abraham. And so I wanted to see for myself. And in my many experiences at all of these temples and mosques and synagogues and meeting all of really some incredible different spiritual and religious leaders, I started to come to realize that the difference wasn't about the teachings and the concepts. I mean, there are differences. The Eastern religions are very otherworldly. They have a lot to do about states of consciousness and enlightenment. Whereas monotheistic religions center around studying and practicing a certain law or living according to a particular authoritative text and teaching. What I realized in the midst of all of this and eventually circled back to is that while Christianity definitely has aspects of the otherworldly, supernatural, and also aspects of living in accordance with a certain lifestyle and set of laws, what makes Christianity totally unique is that it all comes back to one event, a verifiable moment in history. Christianity would not have survived if it was only about Jesus' teachings, as amazing as those are. Even his death, as heroic as it was, couldn't sustain this movement by itself. The cross is an amazing example of sacrifice, but it would become just a sad and tragic story if Jesus had just been buried and that was it. Here's the difference today. You can visit tombs of the founders of every major religion all over the world. You can take flowers to the grave of Abraham in Hebron, and to Buddha in India, and the burial place of Muhammad in Medina. And Kim and I, my wife, spent thousands of dollars, and we flew halfway around the world to visit the burial place of Jesus of Nazareth. And I've got a newsflash for you. He wasn't in there. His tomb was hauntingly and gloriously empty. And so Christianity has put itself out there and said, it's not just a comparison between teachings or worldviews. Jesus is totally unique in that he conquered death. And to that point, that if a person finds the bones of Jesus Christ, this whole thing goes away. This isn't like a little whoops our whole faith hangs on this event. And so if you're here and you haven't accepted the claims of Jesus as true just yet, I hope that you'll find this as compelling as I did. I hope you'll look into it. No other religion has put its claims out there quite like Christianity. They're safe. Believe in our teachings or not, but Christianity has pushed all of its chips into the middle of the table, betting it all that there's no body in that tomb, that the resurrection of Jesus actually happened. And invites every historian and every scientist and every philosopher and every regular Joe and Jane to check it out, investigate it, check out the claims of this young man in the tomb. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. Because if that's true, well, that changes everything. Now, finally, we come to Mark's abrupt and somewhat unsatisfying ending. We look at verse 7. The angel's continuing here. But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. And so they went out and they fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. They were afraid, so they said nothing to anyone. And poof, Mark's gospel ends. No happy resolve, no bold witness, no post-resurrection appearances, just fear and anxious silence and the end. As I said, through this whole gospel, Mark has never shied away from the disciples' failure. Like when Jesus calmed the storm, instead of faith, they had fear. At the Mount of Transfiguration, they couldn't even cast out a demon right afterwards. As Jesus walked on water by their boat, they were afraid. Even this whole journey to the cross, they were running and hiding and denying and betraying and fleeing the whole way. And so Mark's abrupt ending puts an exclamation point on all of this long-running theme of discipleship failure. Why? What's his point? I mean, other gospel writers include all the amazing things that happen next, but because Mark frames his whole ending this way, we need to settle down right here and just ask why. And here's what I want you to see. Your failures are not the end of the story if you're willing to meet the risen Christ. But in order to do that, you're probably first going to have to come to grips with 3 ways we fail. The first way is we fail to show up. And in this way, we are like the disciples. Like they're nowhere to be found in the end of Mark's story. Jesus told them no less than 10 times that he would die and he would rise again on the 3rd day. And not one of them thought to check out that claim. They failed to show up. And are there those of you who have failed to show up? Maybe like you knew that your daughter needed extra time and attention. And God was prompting you that family is the priority right now in this season. But work came calling and happy hour came calling or your buddies came calling. And you failed to show up. Some of you have been away from faith for a long time. You thought you'd maybe drifted too long or fallen too far. Maybe you had a stale experience of religion when you were a kid and it left this bad taste in your mouth about who Jesus was and what the church could be, and you just kind of threw it in the garbage. You threw in the towel. You burned those bridges. You haven't shown up for your faith in a long time. That's okay. The original disciples didn't either. My point is not to shame you. It's to help you see that there's a way forward and to see that it's never too late. After not showing up, the disciples went on to be world changers. And so I ask, what would it look like for you to show up? One easy way would be to show up and to join us for this next teaching series that we're going into. It's going to be a doozy. But there's another kind of failure that's even more subtle that we see in Mark's ending. It's when we fail to wise up. So the women in our story, they just couldn't get their minds and hearts around what was going on. Now, give them some credit. These were strong women, and while the disciples were hiding in fear for their lives, these women were like, yeah, we're going to head over to the tomb and do our thing. The problem was they showed up with expectation to anoint a corpse, not expecting to witness a resurrection. See, they too had been there all along for all of Jesus' resurrection day predictions. And so why weren't they sprinting to the tomb instead of wondering who's going to move the stone, saying, I can't wait to see how he pulled this one off. But they hadn't wised up to the truth of Jesus' words. And there's some of you here today who haven't wised up to the ways and words of Jesus either. Like he's right in front of you. The evidence is all around you. There are clear signs that he's been trying to get your attention, and you just need to wise up. Others of you you're showing up, but with the wrong expectations like the women did. Maybe you're here, but you're kind of going through the motions, or you're here out of obligation, or you're here because you want to meet some new people, or turn over a new leaf, or expose your kids to a positive influence, but you haven't really considered the possibility of a life-changing encounter with the risen Christ. Let me remind you, Christianity isn't some dead religion. It's not some lifeless group of rituals. Jesus Christ is alive. He is here. Going through the motions is not going to cut it anymore. Spiritually stuck is not the norm. Spiritually faking it is not the norm. Walking with the risen Lord is the norm, and it's time to wise up to that truth. The women showed up physically, but they didn't understand spiritually. We're about to see that Peter understood Jesus' words, but he couldn't follow through when it mattered. This is the third kind of failure that we see at the end of Mark's gospel, is that we fail to step up. It's always amazed me that the angel calls Peter out by name. Remember, he says, go tell his disciples and Peter. Now, why is Peter singled out? Well, to get it, we must remember what happened on Thursday, just a few days ago. The angel uses the exact same language Jesus used just 2 chapters ago in Mark 14, 27 to 29. It was after the Last Supper. They were ready to go to the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus says, you will all fall away. But after I'm raised up, says Jesus, I will go before you to Galilee. This is what the angel said. And Peter said to him, even though they all fall away, I will not. Now, listen, Jesus had already accounted for their failures. He already had his plan B in place. You're going to fail, Peter. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. But when you do, I'm going to go ahead of you to Galilee. I want you to meet me there. That'll be your chance to step up. I'll step up right now. No, you won't. Actually, you're going to deny me 3 times to a servant girl around a campfire. But the time is coming that even though you've denied me, I'm going to invite you to step up again. Anybody ever failed God like Peter did? Like you talk a big game, but when the moment comes to obey him, you don't step up. Like maybe you've even shown up, like you're in the right place. Maybe you've wised up, you know the truth, but your failure is the ability to step up. Maybe you failed to step up into something that God is calling you to. Maybe you haven't stepped up to mend a broken relationship. Maybe you haven't stepped up to bring justice or mercy to a situation where there's injustice. Are there those of you who have failed to step up and be faithful to Jesus? The angel tells the woman, Jesus is going to go ahead to Galilee to meet you there. Tell the disciples. And wait. Don't forget to tell Peter. The last time Peter heard that Jesus would meet him in Galilee, he failed big time. Peter needs to know that the offer still stands. He's not disqualified. He can still step up. And some of you need to hear this today too. Jesus knows about your failure, but he's made a way. There's still a path back to him. Oh, we're so familiar with failure, aren't we? So many of us have failed to show up or to wise up or to step up. But that's not all. Like we also failed to keep up and stay up and clean up and make up, shut up, grow up, open up, look up, wake up. A whole lot of us have failed to cowboy up. I don't need to keep going. I mean, fill in the blanks. But as we gather here on Easter of 2025 and listen to this very strange ending to Mark's gospel, I think he has framed his words around our failure so that we will hear the echoes of this one truth. Jesus never fails. We will fail again and again. And the only way to overcome our failure is to go and meet the risen Lord, because Jesus never fails. He keeps his promises. He told them all along that this would happen. Everything he said came true. And I hear people say all the time, well, I don't feel God's love. I know a couple of things to be true. One, our feelings aren't always incredibly reliable. Can we all agree on that? But here's the second thing I know to be true. When you don't feel God's love, there is an empty cross and an empty tomb outside of Jerusalem that proves otherwise. This is not wishy-washy. This is not, true some days and not true other days. The death and resurrection of Jesus Christ in the blood and dirt of history proves beyond the shadow of a doubt that there is a love in heaven with your name on it. But more than that, Jesus is alive, not was alive, is alive right now, today. And just like he was willing to meet the disciples at Galilee, he's also ready to meet you. Today, as we stand at the empty tomb at the end of this gospel, we face the same decision that those first followers faced. Will we stay in our failure, or will we go to meet the Lord? The beauty of Mark's abrupt ending is that it forces us to write the next chapter with our lives. Just like those early disciples, we get to decide what happens after verse 8. History tells us what those failures turned followers chose. The women, they found their voice, and they became the first preachers of the good news. The hiding disciples, they emerged with courage. Peter, who had denied Jesus 3 times, became the rock upon which the church was built. This cowardly group was transformed almost overnight. How? Why the dramatic change? How did they overcome their failure? Well, the same way that we can overcome ours. Not through self-help books, not through the power of positive thinking, not by looking within yourself to try to find your truth, not by joining the right church, not by trying hard to be moral, not 12-step groups, not finding that perfect special someone, not the right therapist, not through intermittent fasting or gratitude journals or avocado toast. Failure is real. And it is the real result of real sin in our real lives. And the only way that we overcome our darkest failures is to repent and to turn around and to go and meet the risen Lord. He's the only hope we've got. He's bigger than your failures because he's the only one who will never fail. Is your marriage failing? Is your willpower failing? Is your purpose in life failing? Is your ability to stand strong on your own failing? Come and meet the risen Lord. See, the invitation of Easter isn't to admire the resurrection from a distance, but to experience it personally. Mark's ending is an invitation to enter the story with all your fears and failures, to let the same power that raised Jesus from the dead bring you life. We are the next chapter. The tomb is empty. The story continues, and the invitation stands. Come and meet the risen Lord. I love you guys.